They fired him on a Tuesday morning, in front of 43 people, and not one of them said a word. Joel Whitmore had been on the floor since 11 the night before. His boots still smelled like hydraulic fluid. There was a grease line under his left thumbnail that he hadn't had time to scrub out, and his eyes had that particular flatness that comes not from laziness, but from a man who has given everything he has to a problem and then been asked to keep going. He walked in 41 minutes late to his shift at Caldwell Precision Manufacturing, and before he could reach his station, Diane Caldwell was already walking toward him from across the floor. She was the kind of person who wore authority the way other people wore good shoes, as though she'd had it long enough that she'd stopped thinking about it. Chief Operating Officer, 39 years old, daughter of the man who built the plant. She had a file folder in her hand. Joel noticed that detail later, that there was already a folder. She hadn't grabbed it on the way over. She'd been holding it. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, loud enough that the compressor noise didn't matter. "Your shift started at 6. "I know," he said. "I can explain. I'm not interested in explanations on a day like today." She opened the folder. "This is the third time this quarter." That was true, technically. The first time had been when Hannah had a fever of 104 and he'd had to wait for his neighbor to come over before he could leave. The second time, his truck had stalled on the Queensway and he'd called ahead. This time he had been here until nearly 7 in the morning doing something she didn't know about yet. And then he'd gone home to get his daughter ready for school because there was no one else to do it, and then he'd driven back. He opened his mouth to say all of that. She held up a hand. "Effective immediately," Diane Caldwell said, and her voice did not waver at all. "You're terminated. Please leave your badge at reception." The floor was quiet in the way that large spaces get quiet when everyone is very deliberately not looking at something. Joel stood there for a moment. He was holding his work gloves in his right hand, and he looked down at them the way a person looks at something they've been carrying, so long they forgot it was there. He set his badge on the nearest workbench. He didn't say anything. He walked out. Joel Whitmore had come to Caldwell Precision almost 11 years ago. The same month his wife, Carla, had been told that the lump they'd found was not benign after all. He'd taken the job because it had better benefits than the garage on Merivale Road, where he'd been working since he was 22, and because the plant ran a shift structure that would let him be home by 4 in the afternoon when it mattered. He was a mechanic by trade and by temperament, the kind of man who understood systems the way other people understood language, who could hear a problem before he could name it, who had once diagnosed a failing bearing on a piece of equipment by the way a vibration changed pitch over 40 seconds. His foreman at the time, a man named Pete Sargent, who'd since retired to Nova Scotia, had told him he was the best diagnostic technician he'd ever seen walk through that door. Carla had died when Hannah was 2 years old. Hannah was now 9. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's tendency to go very quiet when she was working something out in her head. She called him Dad, not Daddy, which she'd decided on herself sometime around age 6, and which Joel had always thought said something accurate about both of them. He picked her up from school that afternoon and did not tell her what had happened. He made pasta for dinner and helped her with a worksheet about ecosystems and read her 2 chapters of the book they'd been working through together. And when she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold and tried to figure out what came next. What had happened the previous night, the reason he'd been 41 minutes late, was this. Diane Caldwell drove a 1987 Lancia Stratos replica that had been built by her father in the late 90s, one of 3 in existence, the other 2 being in a museum in Turin and a private collection in Montreal. It was not a production car. It was not a car that any dealership could service. It was, by any reasonable measure, irreplaceable. It was kept in the climate-controlled bay at the back of the plant. Howard Caldwell's arrangement when he'd handed the business to his daughter, and Joel, By virtue of being the only person on staff with the kind of mechanical background the car required, had been informally designated as its caretaker. No paperwork. No additional pay. Just the understanding, conveyed once by Howard himself before his stroke, that the car was part of the plant's heritage and somebody needed to know it. 3 nights ago, Joel had noticed something wrong with the dry sump oil system during a routine walkthrough. Not a noise, just a pressure reading that was 2 points lower than it should have been. He'd flagged it in the maintenance log and asked Pete Galton, the facilities coordinator, to schedule time for a proper look. Pete had said he'd put it in the queue. The queue moved slowly. 2 nights later, Joel had checked again, and the pressure had dropped another point. He'd sent a message through the internal system asking to move it up. He got an automated response telling him the request had been received. On Monday night, Joel had come in on his own time, after Hannah was in bed, and he had fixed it himself. It took him from 11:15 in the evening until 6:40 in the morning. The oil line coupler had developed a hairline fracture, the kind that shows itself slowly, over months, until one day it doesn't. He'd had to fabricate a replacement seal from stock, because the original part hadn't been manufactured since 2003, and the one supplier he knew who might have had it was in Reggio Emilia and wouldn't open until 4 in the afternoon Eastern. He'd done it by feel, by memory, by the particular knowledge that lives in the hands of someone who has been doing this kind of work for 20 years. He'd left a note in the maintenance log. 1 line, oil system coupler replaced, pressure nominal. J. Whitmore. He hadn't told anyone else. It hadn't occurred to him that he needed to. When he was fired the next morning, the log entry was gone. He found this out 2 weeks later, when he went back to collect a pair of reading glasses he'd left in his locker. The locker had been cleaned out. His glasses were in a small paper bag at reception, but he ran into Jerry Tolan on his way out, who'd worked the overnight with him years back, and who had no particular loyalty to anyone except the truth. "You hear what they found?" Jerry said, lowering his voice. "Found where?" "In the Lancia. DeCarlo was doing the quarterly on it and something came up in the oil system. Pressure's perfect, but the coupler's a patch job." Jerry paused. "A real good one, but not original stock." Joel looked at him. "Nobody signed off on any work order," Jerry said. "DeCarlo went to Diane about it and she apparently said she didn't know anything about it, which made DeCarlo nervous, because whoever did it, they knew what they were doing, like really knew." "What did she say?" "She asked maintenance if there was a log entry. They said no." Joel was quiet for a moment. "There was a log entry." Jerry looked at him. "What?" "I filed it. 6:40 in the morning before I left. 1 line, but it was there." Jerry didn't say anything for a beat. Then Joel, "You should probably talk to someone." He didn't know who that someone was supposed to be. He went home and put his glasses on, and helped Hannah with a spelling test and didn't mention any of it. The one who came to him was someone he didn't expect. His name was Bernard Ossie. He was the plant's director of quality assurance, a precise, careful man in his mid-50s who wore the same style of dark cardigan in what appeared to be 15 different colors, and who had a reputation for asking exactly one question more than anyone else thought was necessary. Joel had spoken to him perhaps 4 times in 11 years, and each time had left with the impression that Bernard Ossie had understood more about the conversation than Joel had intended to share. He called Joel on a Thursday evening, 10 days after the locker visit. "I heard about the coupler," Bernard said, without preamble. "I also heard there's no record of who did the work. I'd like to know if that's accurate." "It's not," Joel said. "I filed a log entry. It was there when I left." There was a pause. Not the kind that means someone is uncertain, the kind that means someone is placing what they've just heard somewhere careful. "And you did the work yourself," Bernard said. "On your own time. The car would have seized in another 2 weeks, Joel said. "Maybe less. I know," Bernard said. "I had a second opinion done." Quietly. Another pause. "Mr. Whitmore, do you know what that car is worth?" "It's not really about worth." "No," Bernard said, "it isn't." He was quiet again. I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to think before you answer. Is there anyone else who would have known enough about that car to make the repair you made? Joel thought. No, that's what I thought too. What Bernard Ossie was doing, though Joel didn't know it yet, was building something. He was the kind of man who moved slowly and without announcement, and who arrived at conclusions the way a river arrives at the sea, by finding every possible path and following the one that was most true. He had already spoken to Pete Galton about the maintenance queue. Pete had been apologetic and vague in the way people are, when they are covering something small and hoping it will be mistaken for covering nothing at all. He'd said the request had come through but had been deprioritized. When Bernard asked by whom, Pete had said he didn't remember. Bernard had then pulled the system logs for the maintenance request Joel had filed. They showed the request submitted, they showed it received. They did not show any action taken, and they did not show a log entry filed at 6:40 on Tuesday morning. But the system kept backup records, not visible in the standard interface, but accessible to someone with the right clearance and the patience to look. Bernard had both. The entry was there, one line, time-stamped 6:41 a.m., oil system coupler replaced. Pressure nominal, J. Whitmore. It had been deleted at 7:03 a.m. from an account that belonged to Pete Galton. Bernard sat with that for a long time before he did anything about it. He went to Diane Caldwell on a Friday afternoon when the floor had mostly cleared and the light through the plant windows was going long and amber. He brought 2 documents, the backup log excerpt and a written assessment from the outside technician he'd brought in. He set them on her desk and waited while she read. She read them twice. He could tell because her eyes moved back to the top of the first page when she finished it. "You're telling me," she said, "that Joel Whitmore came in on his own time and repaired my father's car?" "Yes," and then filed a log entry, "Yes," which was deleted, at 7:03 a.m. from Pete Galton's account. "I have the timestamp." Diane Caldwell looked at the window. The plant was quiet, and I fired him an hour later. Bernard did not answer that because it was not a question. She looked back at the documents. Why would Pete delete the entry? "I don't know yet," Bernard said. "I have some thoughts, but I wanted to speak to you first." "What are your thoughts?" He folded his hands. "Has been putting through work orders for external contractors on 3 pieces of equipment that your father's original maintenance schedule marked as handled in-house. The difference in cost is significant. I don't have enough to say what it means yet, but I don't think it's unrelated." Diane was quiet for a long time. She had the look of someone doing arithmetic that she already knows the answer to and is not happy about. "How long have you known about the work orders?" she said. "I flagged them internally 6 weeks ago," Bernard said. "I was told to let the procurement team review." "Who told you that?" "Pete Galton." She closed her eyes, just for a moment. Joel was in the backyard with Hannah on a Saturday afternoon when his phone rang. Hannah was trying to teach herself to juggle with 3 oranges that were not quite round enough for the purpose, and she'd developed a theory that the problem was technique rather than fruit, which Joel was allowing her to work through on her own terms. He looked at the number. It was Caldwell's main line. He answered it. "Mr. Whitmore." It was Diane Caldwell's voice, and it had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. Not softness exactly, but the particular flatness of someone who has already had an argument with themselves and lost. "Would you be able to come in on Monday morning?" "What for?" A pause. "There are some things I owe you an explanation about." He watched Hannah drop all 3 oranges at once and look at them on the ground with great philosophical patience. "I'll be there," he said. He came in at 8 o'clock, which was on time and deliberate. Bernard Ossie was already there. Pete Galton was not. Joel found out later that Pete's access had been suspended on Friday evening, pending a review by the board that would eventually result in his termination and a referral to the company's legal team over the contractor billing irregularities. Pete had apparently said, when confronted, that he'd deleted the log entry because he hadn't wanted Diane to know the car had needed work. because if she knew the car had needed work, she might start asking who was supposed to have flagged it sooner, and the answer to that was Pete. It was the kind of decision that makes perfect sense for about 30 seconds, and then becomes the worst decision a person has ever made. Diane Caldwell met Joel in the conference room off the main hallway, not in her office. He thought that was probably intentional. The table was smaller. There were 3 chairs. She told him what Bernard had found. She told him about the log entry and the deletion and the timestamp. She laid it out plainly, without softening any of it, which he respected even while he was absorbing it. When she finished, there was a silence. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I fired you in public. I did it quickly and without asking for your side of things, and I did it on the most important morning your team had seen in years, which I thought was justification at the time, and I've since come to understand was exactly backwards." Joel thought about what to say. There were several things available. He chose, "Did you know the car was that far gone?" She shook her head. I don't look at the maintenance log myself. I trusted the system." She paused. "I trusted Pete. The system was the problem," Joel said. "The maintenance request didn't get escalated. If it had, someone would have flagged it through proper channels, and you'd have known about it. Instead, you came in on your own time and fixed it," she said. "It needed fixing." She looked at him steadily. "Why didn't you tell anyone what you were doing? Even just a text message to someone on the overnight team?" Joel thought about that honestly. "I thought the log entry was enough. I wasn't trying to be." He paused. "I wasn't looking for anything from it. The car needed fixing and I knew how to fix it. That was the whole thing." Bernard Ossie said nothing. He had his hands folded on the table and the expression of a man who had already known how this conversation would go. "I'd like to offer you your position back," Diane said, "with full back pay for the period of termination, and I'd like to formalize your role with the Lancia. Proper scope of work, compensation included." Joel was quiet. "I'd also like to understand," she said, "what it would take for you to actually want to come back, not just accept the offer. Want to come back." That surprised him. He looked at her. "The schedule," he said, after a moment. "My daughter's school ends at 3:15. I need to be able to leave by 3 if something comes up. Not every day. Just if it comes up. That's manageable, and if there's a maintenance issue that needs to move up the queue, I need a direct line, not a request form that goes to Pete." "Pete's no longer with us," Bernard said quietly. "To someone who can actually act on it," Joel said. "That can be me," Bernard said. Diane nodded. "Is there anything else?" Joel thought. He thought about 11 years of walking into a building and knowing exactly what needed to be done and doing it, and about Carla, who had believed that knowing your own value was not arrogance but basic honesty, and about Hannah dropping 3 oranges and looking at them with that particular patience of hers. "No," he said. "That's all of it." He went back to work on a Wednesday, not a Monday. Wednesday had been Hannah's idea. She'd said it meant the week was already half over, which meant the first week back would feel shorter, which was smart reasoning for someone who juggled oranges. The floor was the same. The machines were the same. A few people nodded at him when he came in. A few others were pointedly involved in other things. He didn't mind either reaction. He changed into his work clothes in the locker room. His gear had been returned, cleaned and folded, with a note from Bernard that said only welcome back. B.O., and he walked out to his station. Diane Caldwell came by at 9 o'clock. She didn't say anything. She just stopped for a moment at the edge of his work area, looked at what he was doing, a calibration on a milling head that had been running 4 microns off, and then moved on. He took his lunch break at noon and sat outside on the loading dock in the October light and called Hannah at the after-school program to tell her he'd be there at 3:30. "How's it going?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Feels like it did before. Is that good or bad?" He thought about it. "Good," he said. "It just feels like work. That's all I wanted it to feel like." She said okay and went back to whatever she'd been doing, and he sat there for another few minutes in the cold air with his sandwich and thought about the Lancia sitting clean and quiet in its bay at the back of the plant, the oil pressure exactly where it should be, ticking along in the dark. He hadn't gone in to look at it yet. He would, eventually, not to prove anything, just because some things are worth taking care of, and he'd always known that, and nothing that had happened in the last month had changed it. He finished his lunch and went back inside.